Now I can hear everyone shouting, "Yay, Gwen is back with a video." And then I can hear people shouting, "Yay, Gwen is making a video and she's going to talk about conformity and rebellion in the play that we're reading this week, A Raisin in the Sun." You are wrong, because I'm not going to talk about that play, but I'm going to talk about drama in general and perhaps a little bit about conformity and rebellion, or rebellion and conformity. Now, I want to talk about drama and give a little bit of background about drama throughout history, because drama is exceedingly important, and I don't think today that we realize how important drama was in the ancient world. Now, I think elsewhere I mentioned that poetry is the oldest form of literature, and if I did not mention that, though I think I did, I'm going to mention it now. Poetry was the earliest form of literature, and several reasons. It was easy to remember, with meter and rhyme and so on and so on, and the bards in Celtic heritage, and the Scots in Norse culture. I might have said that wrong, and if anybody knows the right way to pronounce it, please let me know. And of course, poets such as Homer, if he existed, but it really doesn't matter, in Greece, related poetry as a form of history and entertainment. But next, after after poetry comes drama. And drama is the second oldest form of literature in the world. Now, having said that, you really couldn't separate poetry from drama in the ancient world, because when the actors were on stage giving their lines, they were in poetic form, and this carried on for literally centuries. And if you read Shakespeare, those plays are written in verse. It's not prose. And so the tradition of poetry was carried on even in drama. Now, why drama before short stories? Well, one reason is because in the ancient world and the modern world, people were not literate. They didn't know how to read. So there were very few people who would have read the scripts of plays, and very few people who would have been able to have read written versions of the poetry or short stories or novels. In the modern world, we're extremely fortunate, especially here in the United States and Western cultures, that so many people have been taught to read and write. And I'm not going to go into the percentage of illiterate people that are still even within the United States, but it's a national shame, but I'm not going to go into that because that's not what I'm talking about. So drama, early drama, was poetry. Poetry spoken on stage. And drama grew out of religious rituals. And it grew into other bigger spectacles, for lack of a better word. But originally, the priest and the priestesses would do the rituals, and they would enact them. It wouldn't be just a matter of reading a liturgy or reading from a scroll, but performing the action for a couple of reasons. And one was because we will pay more attention when we are entertained. And it's much more entertaining to watch actors deliver roles than it is to hear somebody read. Especially, well, I won't say always that it's better, but if people don't use the right inflection when they're reading, it can be very boring. So for audiences who were illiterate, this was a way to teach important religious lessons to them. And although this began in Sumeria and Egypt and came to a high form in Greece, when drama developed even further and they started to, they always did. The plays were based on the mythology of the time, and most Grecian plays are based on mythology. You have Oedipus, you have the Orestia, you have many other plays that were still considered history because they believed in the plays, but not all Greek plays were based on myth, and but many of them were. But this tradition of teaching religious aspects and edicts to the masses continued on for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so in the Middle Ages and the medieval era, throughout Europe and in England, they had what were called the mystery or the cycle plays. Now, in this case, mystery does not mean a murder mystery or a secret, but probably was adapted from mastery. And the masters would be, the guilds would put on these plays, and so the men who belonged to the guilds, not women, women didn't belong to guilds except in very few cases, they were the masters. They were called cycle plays because these plays were the cycle of biblical stories, starting with creation and going through to the crucifixion of Jesus. And these plays, and we have copies of these plays, they were very interesting, and how they would perform them is they would be on wagons. And during a week or however long it took during the year, the wagons would be set up in the street, and each wagon would have a play, and the play would be performed from that wagon, and each guild would have a wagon and perform a specific play. They sometimes loosely adapted books of the Bible, and remember, this was before the Protestant Reformation, so these would have been Catholics. Some of the plays were even bawdy. Some of them were quite humorous. And some of the characters in these plays were well known for how the actors were supposed to portray them. For example, in the crucifixion, the character of Herod the king, the Herod, whatever stage directions existed, Herod was a very large and loud character, and even Shakespeare wrote about an actor, said he out-Heroded Herod, which means he was overly dramatic and really pouring it on. And these mystery plays, again, were to educate the masses about the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, because these people could not read and could not write. Later, the Protestant Reformation really stressed people learning to read and write, and that's why Sunday schools arose. Sunday schools originally taught people, children and adults, how to read and write, but I'm getting off topic there. So we had plays, our collective past ancestors had plays, which were, poems, which were then expanded upon and used in plays, and drama was developed. Now, in Greece, Dionysus and Apollo both were patrons of the arts, and we talk about this in my mythology class, but this isn't the mythology class. And playwrights were extremely, extremely well respected, and in Greece they had a big contest every year for the best play, just like we have today with the Oscars and what are some other rewards, the Golden Globe, and I'm not real hep on modern media anymore, but we still do this today. And so that is a bit of history about drama. Drama was sometimes considered low class, and consider opera, for example. Opera is a form of drama. I guess you could say they were the first musicals. Opera, we consider that very highbrow now and artistic and artsy. Originally, opera was not considered that way at all. It was the common people who went to watch operas. And of course, that changed over the centuries and so on and so on. And by the way, in the Protestant Reformation, drama was squashed. Any drama had to do with strictly religious aspects, and it was very striated, and all the bawdiness, all the humor was gone. And so the Protestant Reformation had a big effect on drama for quite some time, but it came back, and drama evolved into movies. And I think back at the beginning of the semester, or the beginning of the term, and sometimes I get this class and my other class that I teach, Intro to Lit, at my other school confused, but I'm sure that I ask you, are movies literature? If plays are literature, then why are movies not literature? And if I recall correctly, some of you even said that a script is literature, but when a movie is performed, it's no longer literature. Well, why not? What's changed? Think about it. So that's that's a little bit of background on drama, and it has become an absolute staple of entertainment, and it's always been a source of entertainment, but in some eras, it was used much more to educate an illiterate society. Now, conformity and rebellion. We see some aspects of conformity and rebellion even within the production of plays. I talked about how the Protestant Reformation shut down the theaters. That was not necessarily an act of rebellion on the part of the Protestants, if they were the status quo then. But do you think that stopped all performances everywhere? And what about when plays started coming back in? So literally speaking, drama can fit in with conformity or rebellion and conformity. But that's not what we're talking about, the actual production of plays. But that A Raisin in the Sun has to do with rebellion and conformity. And I noted in the written part of this announcement that I grew up during the 60s and the 70s. I was born in 1952. And rebellion was a way of life in the 60s and even in the 70s. And with the modern political scene, we are seeing this again. But when does rebellion become conformity? And take the Soviet Union, for example. That was a cultural and political rebellion. And when the communists toppled the Bolsheviks, toppled the ruling class, the Tsar in Russia, that was definitely an act of rebellion. But then the Communist Party and the communist way of life became the status quo. And even within that, there were still Russians who were rebelling against the communists. But in the way that political rebellion often goes, the people who led the rebellion and the people who came after them were very careful to squash, I keep using that word, but I can't think of anything, suppress, there you go, to suppress any forms of new rebellions. We see this in China with Mao Zedong. We see this with the communists in Russia. We see this with the communists in Cuba as well. And of course, Fidel Castro just died not too long ago. So rebels, whether they are cultural, and here in the United States, I want to rebels such as James Dean, Marlon Brando, that were portrayed in movies as a rebel without a cause, they became conformist. And a lot of people started wearing leather jackets and doing the same things that the rebels do. So does rebellion always sift down into a type of conformity? And why are rebels so opposed to new rebellions? Why does my generation, the hippie generation, and not everybody in my generation was a hippie, why do so many old hippies look at some of the rebellious aspect of young people today and denigrate it or make fun of it? Do we lose that spontaneity? Do we lose that sense of why the youth tend to rebel? Think about that and read the play. And I gave you some background on the history of drama. And I think I'm just about finished babbling for right now. So read the announcement below and let's move on with it.